On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order about strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. The media loved it. Pro-crypto. American innovation. Finally, a president who understands Bitcoin. Then, a few weeks later, the White House rolled out the big headline, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, the government officially holding Bitcoin as a national asset. Number go up. Crypto Twitter celebrated. Everybody called it bullish. I did something different. I sat down and read the actual executive orders, line by line, and what I found felt disturbingly familiar. If you go back to 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. That's the order that effectively forced Americans to turn in their gold to the government. The language in that era was very deliberate. Gold was called a strategic asset vital to national economic stability. The Treasury was given authority to acquire and hold gold. Confiscation was framed as essential to recovery. And non-compliance? That was a federal crime. Fast forward to 2025. Trump's digital asset executive order and the later strategic Bitcoin reserve use eerily similar framing. Bitcoin is described as a strategic asset tied to national security and leadership. The Treasury is explicitly authorized to acquire, hold, and manage digital assets at scale. The reserve is positioned as essential for maintaining American power in the new financial system. Different asset, different century, but the same structure. Declare the asset strategic. Centralize control over it. Build the legal and technical machinery to hold a lot of it. That's where the story really starts. Forget the headlines for a second. Let's talk about what this framework actually sets up. Section 1. Policy. The U.S. government will acquire, hold, and manage digital assets. Bitcoin isn't just some experiment anymore. It's being elevated to the same conceptual level as gold reserves or strategic oil reserves. That sounds bullish. Until you remember what happened the last time an asset was declared strategic. Section 2. Authority. The Treasury is told to build custody infrastructure for Bitcoin and other digital assets. That means government-scale cold storage, cybersecurity architecture, official valuation rules, legal frameworks for how these assets are booked and priced. In plain English, they're building a giant official government-backed Bitcoin warehouse. You don't build that just to hold a tiny bag. Section 3. Acquisition methods. This is where things get interesting. The U.S. government already controls a huge pile of Bitcoin from seizures and cases like the Bitfinex hack and Silk Road. Estimates put it around 200,000 BTC held or controlled at various times. The new framework lays out multiple ways to keep adding seizures from criminal and civil cases, accepting Bitcoin and other coins as payment for fines and penalties. Strategic transactions. A very broad term that can include over-the-counter deals, swaps, and other forms of acquisition. Notice what's missing. Clear limits. There's no defined cap on how much Bitcoin the government can accumulate. No sunset clause. No built-in brakes. Section 4. Protection. On paper, the order talks about protecting lawful holders. That sounds reassuring until you ask one simple question. Who decides what lawful means? That definition doesn't live in this order. It lives in future regulations, reporting rules, registration requirements, licensing, compliance checklists. If you meet every requirement, you're a lawful holder. If you don't or can't, you're not. And if your status flips from lawful to unlawful, suddenly those protections don't apply to you anymore. Let's rewind to the 1930s. The playbook that was used for gold looked like this. 1. Declare the asset strategic. 2. Grant the government broad acquisition authority. 3. Build the infrastructure and legal framework. 4. Then, make participation mandatory. Steps 1 to 3 came through Executive Order 6102 and related actions. Step 4, the real teeth, arrived with the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, which cemented government control and changed the official price of gold. Once you recognize that pattern, the current moves around Bitcoin start to look less like random pro-crypto news and more like setup moves in a longer game. In 2025, with Bitcoin, Step 1, strategic language. Step 2, acquisition and custody authority. Step 3, infrastructure and working groups. Which leaves one big, uncomfortable question hanging in the air. What does Step 4 look like this time? Now we're moving from the text of the order into the logical implications if this playbook continues. Think of it as 4 phases. Phase 1, 2025 legal framework. This is where we are now. Executive orders signed, strategic Bitcoin reserve created on paper, working groups and task forces formed, custody systems being built, the public narrative, America is embracing crypto. This is bullish. All of that makes people relax. It disarms skepticism. Phase 2, 2026, quiet accumulation. Once the machinery is in place, the government can accumulate more Bitcoin and digital assets without big public announcements. Through seizures and enforcement actions, through fines and settlements paid in BTC, through strategic transactions that don't show up in retail order books. At the same time, regulations can slowly tighten. Self-custody doesn't get banned outright. It just becomes more complicated, more paperwork heavy, more legally intimidating. The result? Weaker hands exit. Coins drift from individuals into bigger, more controlled pools. Phase 3, 2027, crisis and forced selling. If, and this is an if, a serious debt or financial crisis hits, that's when extraordinary measures become politically sellable. Right now, U.S. federal debt is over $37 to $38 trillion, and interest costs are eating a bigger share of the budget every year. In a crisis, a government with a legal framework around Bitcoin, a custody infrastructure, a strategic reserve already in place, suddenly has an option on the table. For stability, for national security, we need citizens above a certain threshold to sell their Bitcoin to the Treasury at the official price. Not a door-to-door seizure, a mandatory sale backed by emergency powers, penalties for non-compliance. Data from exchanges, banks, and prior reporting. And just like with gold in the 1930s, that official price could be below the free market price. For example, selling at something like 80 KOs in a panic, only to watch it reprice far higher later on. Again, this is a scenario, not a prediction. But it's a scenario the historical record makes it hard to ignore. Phase 4, revaluation and reset. If the government manages to accumulate a huge stack of Bitcoin and gold during a crisis, then later revalues those assets higher on its own balance sheet, it can effectively devalue the currency, reduce the real burden of its debt, strengthen its reserves on paper. In the 1930s, gold was revalued after Americans had been ordered to surrender theirs, which helped the government's balance sheet at the expense of private holders. In a digital age, a similar mechanism could revolve around Bitcoin, gold, possibly other hard assets. Again, this is not guaranteed. It's a logical extension of a pattern we've seen before. To really understand why governments might even consider something like this, you have to zoom out. Look at the numbers. U.S. national debt, over $38 trillion and climbing. Interest payments projected to reach levels that rival or exceed major federal programs. At a certain point, the math stops working. You can't realistically tax enough to fix it. You can't grow out of it fast enough. You can't cut spending enough without political chaos. Historically, when nations run into that wall, they tend to choose some mix of inflation, currency devaluation, capital controls, and, in extreme cases, partial or full confiscation, forced conversion of strategic assets. That's what happened with gold in 1933-34. Debt and monetary pressure created the pretext, so when you see a government suddenly elevating Bitcoin to strategic asset status, building big legal and technical structures around it, positioning itself as the central manager of digital reserves, It's reasonable to at least ask whether some version of that old playbook is being prepared for the digital age. So what do you actually do with this information? First, this is not a call to panic. It's a call to pay attention. Understand that. Any asset brought inside the definition of strategic is likely to attract heavier regulation over time. The gap between pro-innovation language and emergency powers can close very quickly once a crisis hits. The distinction between lawful holder and unlawful holder is not fixed. It can change as laws and rules evolve. Second, whatever you hold, Bitcoin, gold, cash, real estate, you need to think in terms of legal risk, regulatory risk, jurisdiction risk, concentration risk. Diversification isn't just about which coins you own. It's about where you hold value, how it's custodied, and which legal systems it sits inside. Third, and most importantly, don't outsource your entire view of reality to headlines and bullish narratives. Read the documents, read the executive orders, look at the debt charts, follow the regulatory changes. Governments will always frame moves like this as protection, leadership, or stability. History shows that sometimes they are also moves of control. In 1933, most people didn't see what was coming until it was already happening. Gold didn't stop being valuable. It just stopped being theirs. In 2025, we're watching a new strategic asset framework being built in real time, this time around Bitcoin and digital assets. Will it end in the same kind of forced conversion and revaluation we saw with gold? No one can say for sure. But here's the one thing you can control. Whether you walk into the next phase of this story blind or with your eyes open. Read the order yourself. Verify every claim, think in terms of scenarios, not guarantees, and position accordingly, legally, thoughtfully, and intentionally. This is Fiscal Prophecy. If you found this useful, subscribe. Share it with someone who still thinks all of this is just bullish news. And I'll see you in the next one.